What if, at the very moment you need to win the most, life asked you to save someone? He just wanted one chance. One, to change everything. He left home with hunger, hope, and the suit that once belonged to his father. But all it took was a cry, a lost gaze, a panicked child. And he did the unthinkable. He let his own dream go to hold someone else's world in his hands. That choice would cost him everything. Or, perhaps, it was the very thing that would open the door he had waited for so long. Because sometimes what looks like a loss is just the beginning of something far greater. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. The early morning light crept slowly through the cracks of the window in the small apartment in the east of Queens, New York City, bringing with it that damp chill that seemed to cling to the skin and never let go. Liam had been awake for almost an hour, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed he shared with his sister, observing the dark patch of damp on the ceiling that spread like a map of all he had yet to conquer. His 26 years seemed to weigh much more than they should on that Thursday morning, as if each year carried with it all the unfulfilled promises, all the postponed dreams, all the bills that piled up on top of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. The suit hanging on the wardrobe door was the only thing that shone in that dark room. He got up slowly, careful not to wake Isabella, and walked to the garment with an almost religious reverence. That dark grey suit was not just a piece of clothing. It was an inheritance, the last thing left of his father, William, who had worked for 30 years as a maintenance assistant at a transport company downtown. Liam ran his fingers over the fabric, already frayed at the edges, feeling the weight of what the jacket represented. Sacrifice, dignity, the hope that one day things could be different. He remembered perfectly the day his father came home with that suit, almost 10 years ago. William was beaming. He had just been promoted to supervisor, a position he had pursued for years. He bought the suit on a 12-month installment plan from a store in the borough, chose every detail carefully, tried it on 3 times before deciding. That night they had roast chicken, rice and beans for dinner, a modest but meaningful celebration. His father talked about how things were going to get better, how he would finally be able to give the family a better life, pay for private school for Liam to finish high school. His eyes shone in a way his son never forgot. But life has a cruel way of snatching hope from the hands of those who need it most. 3 years later, William collapsed, in the company's yard during a particularly hot summer day. His colleagues said he had been complaining of fatigue for weeks, but no one paid much attention. The medical certificate cited extreme exhaustion, uncontrolled high blood pressure, a heart that simply couldn't take the rhythm of double shifts, endless overtime, the constant pressure from a boss who only knew how to demand results without ever asking how people were doing. Liam was only 19 when he found himself alone, responsible for Isabella, who at the time was just 1.5 years old. His mother had left shortly after the birth, leaving the 2 men of the house completely lost on how to care for a baby. Now looking at the suit his father had worn only 5 times before he passed, Liam felt the weight of that responsibility tighten even more. Isabella was 8 years old, a smart girl full of dreams and impossible questions about the future. She didn't remember her father, but she unknowingly carried his mannerisms, the way she frowned when she was concentrating, the loud, contagious laugh that lit up any room. It was for her that Liam had gone back to school, taking a technical course in systems analysis at night, while working during the day loading boxes in warehouses, supermarkets, street markets, anything that paid the rent and put food on the table. It was 7 years of silent struggle, of late nights studying after Isabella was asleep, of entire Sundays solving programming exercises on an old computer that crashed every 5 minutes. There were moments when he thought about giving up, especially when the exhaustion was so great that the letters danced on the screen and he couldn't understand anything anymore. But then he would look at his sister sleeping, clutching the teddy bear they'd received from a neighborhood church's Christmas drive, and he knew he didn't have the right to quit. She trusted him blindly, believed her brother was capable of anything, and that pure, unconditional faith was both the force that kept him on his feet and the weight that nearly crushed him. The junior analyst position at Tech Solutions had appeared like a miracle in the midst of his desperation. Liam had been sending out resumes for months, receiving only silence or automated replies, thanking him for his interest, but informing him that his profile did not fit the company's needs. He could read between the lines, understood that profile meant formal experience, that companies' needs meant a degree from a private university, that did not fit was a polite way of saying that people like him were not welcome in those spaces. But he kept trying because giving up would mean accepting a fate he refused to embrace. When the email from Tech Solutions arrived, Liam had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. The company was looking for diverse talent, people with different stories, professionals who could bring new perspectives to a rapidly growing team. The selection process had several stages, starting with an in-person interview at the company's headquarters, an imposing glass and steel building in the heart of Park Avenue. Liam researched everything about Tech Solutions, read interviews with the founder, an entrepreneur named Khalil Assad, who had built a technology empire by the age of 35, rising from absolute nothing to become a benchmark in the market. Khalil's story was inspiring and intimidating at the same time. He had arrived in the United States as a child, fleeing conflicts in the Middle East with his family, and grew up helping his father in a small electronics shop on Canal Street. He had a natural talent for understanding how things worked, dismantling computers and equipment with impressive ease, and he saved up money until he could open his own technology consulting firm. 10 years later, Tech Solutions was one of New York's most promising companies, with major contracts and a reputation for innovation that attracted the best professionals in the market. Liam ran a hand through his curly hair, adjusted the suit one more time, and picked up the synthetic leather briefcase he had bought at a second-hand shop in the borough. Inside it, carefully organized in a binder, with clear plastic sleeves, were the documents that told his story. The diploma from his technical course, certificates from free online courses he had taken on Sundays, letters of recommendation from teachers who believed in him when no one else did, the resume printed on special paper that cost $15 at a copy shop. Each sheet represented a small victory, proof that he had value, that he deserved this chance. He checked the clock on the kitchen wall and did the mental calculations he had repeated dozens of times the night before. It was 5:30 in the morning. The bus to downtown passed at 6:15 at the stop on the main avenue. The journey took approximately an hour and 20 minutes, considering the heavy Thursday morning traffic. The interview was scheduled for 8 o'clock. If everything went well, he would arrive 20 minutes early, enough time to go to the restroom, wash his face, take a deep breath, and mentally prepare for the moment that could change everything. He made a simple coffee, ate 2 slices of bread with margarine, and took a quick shower under the spray that barely got warm and required a complicated dance to find the right angle where the water was less icy. When he finished dressing and checked the cracked bathroom mirror, he felt a pang of emotion pierce his chest. There he was, Liam Henry Smith, son of William, brother of Isabella, resident of apartment 203 in the walk-up building on Camellia Street, wearing his father's suit and carrying dreams too big to fit in that thin body, lean from heavy labor and little food. He went back to the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Isabella stirred. The teddy bear fell to the floor and she slowly opened, her eyes still sleepy. When she saw her brother dressed like that, all smart in the suit she had only seen in old photos, a huge smile lit up her face. "Liam, you look handsome," she said, her voice hoarse from sleep. "You're going to get the job, I know you will." He felt a lump in his throat, the kind of emotion that hurts and warms at the same time. He knelt beside the bed and held his sister's small hand between his own, which were calloused from carrying so much weight. "I'll do my best, Bella. I promise. I'll do everything I can to get this position. If I get this job, our life will change. You'll be able to have your own things, your own new toys. You won't have to wear donated school uniforms anymore. We'll be able to eat better, maybe even move to a place with less damp on the walls." Isabella squeezed his hand tightly, a surprising strength for such a small girl. "I don't care about those things, Liam. I just want you to be okay, for you not to be so tired all the time. Dad died tired. I don't want that to happen to you." His sister's words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. She was small, but she understood so much more than he imagined. He pulled her into a tight hug, feeling the tears burn in his eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "Nothing's going to happen to me, Bella, I promise. Today I'm going to this interview. I'm going to show them that I know how to do the job, that I studied hard, and that I deserve that position. And when I come home tonight, we'll celebrate, even if it doesn't work out. Just trying is already a victory." She pulled back a little and looked into his eyes with that seriousness only children can muster. "It will work out, Liam. I believe in you like no one else. You're the best brother in the whole world, and any company that hires you will be very lucky." He kissed his sister's forehead, placed the teddy bear beside her on the bed, picked up his briefcase, and left the apartment before the emotion made him break down. He descended the 3 flights of stairs, holding tightly to the rusted handrail, crossed the small courtyard, where the superintendent was already awake, sweeping the dry leaves that had fallen during the night, and stepped out onto the still dark street of the New York dawn. The walk to the bus stop took 10 minutes. Liam knew every stone on that path, every pothole in the poorly maintained asphalt, every corner where street vendors were starting to set up their carts before sunrise. He greeted Maria, who sold coffee and bread from the corner cart, and waved to Mr. Jenkins, who had been opening his bakery at 5:30 every day for 30 years. These people were his community, people who fought every day to survive with dignity in a city that seemed to have no room for those not born with privilege. He arrived at the bus stop at exactly 6:10. A small group was already waiting, domestic workers in clean, well-ironed uniforms, security guards finishing night shifts with eyes red from fatigue, students from public universities carrying heavy backpacks full of books and dreams. They all shared that same expression of silent resignation, the certainty that the day would be long and difficult, but that there was no choice but to face it with all possible strength. The bus arrived at 6:18, 3 minutes late but still within an acceptable range. Liam entered through the back door, swiped the Metro card he had topped up the day before with the last few dollars left after paying the rent, and began to look for a place where he could be minimally comfortable during the trip. The vehicle was already packed, as it always was at that hour, a jumble of tired bodies squeezing into a space too small for so many people. He found a spot near the window, standing, holding onto the metal bar that swayed, with every abrupt break from the driver. He propped the briefcase between his legs and took his phone out of his pocket, determined to use the time to mentally review possible interview questions. He had noted everything in a notes app: questions about professional experience, technical knowledge, personal projects, career expectations. For each question, he had prepared careful answers, balancing honesty and strategy, showing his skills without sounding arrogant, admitting his limitations without seeming insecure. He was so focused on his phone screen that he almost didn't notice when the bus made a slightly longer stop than usual in the neighboring district. But then a movement caught his attention. A caregiver hurried on through the front door, pulling a little girl, no more than 4 years old, by the hand. The child was visibly from a different social class. Her expensive designer coat and well-cut dress stood out completely from the surroundings. She had delicate features, fair skin, and enormous brown eyes that seemed to observe everything with curiosity and a little fear. The caregiver was visibly nervous, constantly looking at her phone, typing quick messages, while trying to balance the girl and a large bag slung over her shoulder. Liam overheard fragments of the phone conversation she was having as she passed him, looking for a place to sit. "Yes, Mr. Assad, I'm taking Jasmine to the hospital for the tests you requested. The driver's car is at the mechanic, so I took the bus. Yes, I know you'd prefer I used a cab, but the app is impossible to get a ride on at this hour. We'll be there on time, don't worry." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she were dealing with someone very demanding on the other end of the line. Liam watched the caregiver finally find a seat in the middle of the bus, settling the girl beside her. Jasmine looked uncomfortable, glancing around with the confused expression of someone who had never been on a crowded bus before. Her expensive little clothes, her soft leather shoes, everything about her screamed that this was not her environment, that she belonged to a different world. Liam turned his attention back to his phone, trying not to get distracted. Every minute counted. Every second of mental preparation could make a difference in the interview. But there was something about that scene, about the vulnerability of that small child. in a strange environment that stirred something inside him. He remembered when he had to take Isabella to daycare in the early years, how scared she would get amidst so many strangers, how she needed his presence to feel safe. The bus continued its chaotic journey through the streets of New York, stopping and starting abruptly, swaying the passengers from side to side as if they were sacks of potatoes. Liam checked his watch. 6:45. He was on schedule. If everything continued at the same pace, he would arrive on Park Avenue around 7:30, giving him plenty of time to prepare psychologically before the interview that could change his life forever. That's when it happened. The driver, annoyed by a car that cut him off in traffic, slammed on the brakes with sudden violence. The entire bus was jolted. Cries of protest echoed through the vehicle, and then a different sound cut through the air, the frightened cry of a child. Liam turned his head quickly and saw the scene that would make his heart race. Jasmine had slipped off the seat with the sudden stop. Her small, fragile body had fallen into the aisle, her head hitting the worn rubber floor hard. The caregiver panicked immediately, dropping her phone and throwing herself to the floor to pick up the girl. But something was wrong, very wrong. Jasmine wasn't just crying from the shock, she was struggling to breathe, her little face turning pale, her eyes widening in panic as she tried to draw breath and couldn't. Her cries became irregular, choppy, desperate. "Someone needs to call an ambulance," the caregiver shouted, her voice choked with panic. "Please, she's hurt, she can't breathe properly." Liam felt his entire body tense up. He looked around and saw what he always saw. In these moments, people averting their eyes, playing dumb, pretending they saw nothing. The driver, instead of helping, started complaining loudly that he couldn't have a sick child on his bus, that it would delay everything, that he had a schedule to keep. The caregiver tried to calm the girl, but she was so nervous that her hands were shaking. She was on the verge of a crisis herself. The bus continued moving for a few more minutes, the situation growing more tense. Jasmine was gasping for air, small tears streaming down her frightened face, and no one was doing anything. Liam gripped the handle he was holding tightly, feeling his father's suit against his skin, remembering William's words. "Doing the right thing is almost never easy at first, Liam, but it's the only way to be at peace with yourself later." And then, to the caregiver's horror and the indifference of the other passengers, the driver stopped the bus at an unscheduled stop in the middle of a practically deserted street, surrounded by closed warehouses and shops with their doors still locked. He opened the front door and spoke with a harshness that cut the air like a blade. "You two have to get off here. I can't continue the trip with a sick kid on the bus. If you want, call an ambulance from the sidewalk. I'm not dealing with this here." The caregiver looked outside, saw the empty street, and the despair in her eyes was absolute. Liam felt as if time had stopped. He looked at his watch. 7 o'clock in the morning. If he stayed on the bus, he would arrive at the perfect time for his interview. If he got off to help, he would lose everything. All those years of struggle, all nights studying, all the hope he carried with him like a treasure too fragile to exist in this cruel world. He saw Isabella in his mind, sleeping with her teddy bear, blindly trusting that her brother would come home with good news. He saw the damp patch on the apartment ceiling, the accumulated bills, the nearly empty refrigerator. He saw the future he could have if he simply stayed on the bus, if he pretended he saw nothing, if he let someone else's life be not his problem. But he also saw his father, William, collapsing in the company yard, exhausted from carrying a world that never recognized his worth. He saw himself years later, looking in the mirror and asking what kind of man he had become. And he saw that small, frightened girl struggling to breathe, being abandoned on an empty street by a world that cared about nothing but schedules and profits. Liam closed his eyes for a second, felt his heart beat so hard it seemed to want to burst from his chest, and then he made the decision that would change everything. "Stop the bus," he shouted in a voice he didn't even recognize as his own. "I'm getting off to help." The driver stopped with an irritated sigh. Liam moved through the crowded aisle, urgently asking people to excuse him, holding tightly to the briefcase that contained all his dreams. When he reached the door, he looked back one last time, saw the bus that would take him to his future, and then jumped onto the sidewalk, wet from the fine drizzle that was beginning to fall. The door closed behind him with a definitive sound. The bus continued on its way, taking with it all the other passengers who chose not to see, not to care, not to get involved. Liam stood there for a moment, feeling the fine rain soak his father's suit, holding the briefcase against his chest, and wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the only act that would define him as the man he wanted to be. Liam ran the few yards that separated the unscheduled stop from the sidewalk where the caregiver was kneeling beside Jasmine. The girl continued to breathe with that frightening, irregular rhythm, her face growing paler, her lips beginning to take on a slightly bluish tint that made his heart race even faster. He had seen it before, years ago, when Isabella had a severe bronchitis attack and almost suffocated before they could get to the emergency room. The caregiver was paralyzed with panic, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold her phone. Liam knelt beside them, took off his own jacket without a second thought, and carefully wrapped the girl in it, trying to keep her warm as the drizzle turned into a more consistent rain. "What's her name?" he asked in a firm but gentle voice, trying to project a calm he was far from feeling. "Jasmine," the caregiver replied between sobs. "She has asthma. Sometimes she has attacks when she gets nervous or hurt. I don't know what to do. My phone can't get a signal. There's no service here." Liam took out his own phone, checked that he had a weak but sufficient signal, and dialed 911. The wait for the initial tones seemed to last an eternity. Finally, a professional mechanical voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your location?" He looked around, trying to identify a landmark, and saw a street sign partially faded by rust and time. "We're on Barron Street and the State Expressway, near the old municipal market warehouses. I have a child about 4 years old who fell on the bus, hit her head, and is in severe respiratory distress. She has a history of asthma. I need an ambulance urgently." The operator asked several protocol questions: the child's name, exact age, specific symptoms, if she was conscious, if there was any visible bleeding. Liam answered everything with a precision that surprised himself, keeping his voice steady even as he watched Jasmine struggle more and more to draw breath. The caregiver held the girl's hand and repeated phrases in Arabic, words Liam didn't understand, but which were clearly meant for comfort and affection. "An ambulance is on its way. It should arrive in approximately 15 minutes. Keep the child warm, don't try to move her much, and monitor her vital signs," the operator instructed before hanging up. 15 minutes. Liam looked at his watch and felt a crushing weight in his chest. It was already 7:15 in the morning. The interview would start in 45 minutes. Even if the ambulance arrived on time, even if he managed to get the girl to safety and run to catch another bus, he would never make it. All that careful planning, all those precise time calculations had gone down the drain, literally, as the rain was now falling harder, soaking his suit, drenching the synthetic leather briefcase on the ground beside him. But when he looked at Jasmine, so small and scared, struggling to breathe as she clung to his jacket as if it were a life raft, all those worries seemed distant and insignificant. What was a job interview compared to a child's life? What were his dreams in the face of the despair of this substitute mother who clearly loved this girl as if she were her own? He began to speak softly to Jasmine, trying to distract her from the fear and the difficulty of breathing. He told her about Isabella, about how she was also small and brave, about the teddy bear she slept with every night. The girl didn't respond much, but her large eyes fixed on him, and it seemed that his calm voice helped her focus on something other than panic. The caregiver, who introduced herself as Fatima, finally managed to regain some of her composure. She explained through tears that she had worked for the Assad family for 3 years, that Jasmine was like a daughter to her, that the girl's father was very demanding and protective, and that he would be furious when he found out she had put the child in danger by taking a crowded bus instead of waiting for the private driver. "You didn't put her in danger," Liam said firmly. "It was an accident. These things happen. The important thing now is that she gets help, and that's what we're going to do. But Mr. Assad will fire me. I know he will. He trusts me to take care of his daughter, and I failed," Fatima cried, the guilt weighing visibly on her shoulders. Liam wanted to say something comforting, but he knew he had no authority to make promises about what the girl's father would or would not do. Instead, he focused on keeping Jasmine calm, constantly checking if she was still conscious and breathing, even with difficulty. The 15 minutes the operator had promised turned into 20, then 25. With each passing minute, Liam saw his chances of making it to the interview completely evaporate. It was already 7:40 when they finally heard the approaching siren of the ambulance. The sound was both an immense relief and a definitive confirmation. He had missed the interview. All that struggle, all those years of sacrifice, the hope that had shone so brightly the night before, it had all ended on a rain-soaked sidewalk as he held an unknown child in his arms. The paramedics quickly got out, trained professionals who assessed the situation in seconds. They asked Fatima quick questions about Jasmine's medical history, checked her vitals, and administered oxygen through a small mask adapted for children. The girl began to breathe a little better, the color slowly returning to her frightened face. "We need to take her to the hospital immediately. Who's coming with her?" one of the paramedics asked as they prepared the portable stretcher. Fatima tried to stand up, but her legs were shaking so much she almost fell. The delayed shock was taking over her body. Liam held her by the arm, helped her stabilize, and looked at the paramedics. "I'll go in the ambulance. She's not in a condition to go alone, and the girl needs someone who can answer the doctor's questions clearly." The paramedic nodded, recognizing the logic of that decision. They helped Fatima get in first, then placed Jasmine on the stretcher, securing her carefully so she wouldn't get hurt during the ride. Liam got in last, carrying his drenched briefcase, his father's suit sticking uncomfortably to his wet body. As the ambulance sped toward the nearest hospital, he sent a quick email to Tech Solutions, briefly explaining that he had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to make the interview at that time. He didn't go into detail, not wanting to seem like he was making excuses. He simply stated the fact and apologized for the inconvenience. The automated reply arrived almost instantly, thanking him for his contact and informing him that the Human Resources Department would be in touch shortly. Liam could read between the lines. It was a standard response for no-show candidates. They wouldn't reschedule. They had dozens, maybe hundreds of other candidates waiting for that chance. He was just another number, another person who couldn't keep a basic commitment to be on time. He rested his head against the cold wall of the ambulance and closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything he had just lost. How was he going to explain this to Isabella? How was he going to look his sister in the eye and say he had thrown away the only real chance they had to escape that life of hardship? She would understand. She would probably even say he did the right thing. But that didn't change the fact that the rent was late, the fridge was empty, and the dreams he had carried that morning had drowned in the rain along with that soaked suit. The public hospital they were taken to was exactly as Liam remembered from all the other times he had needed to take Isabella. Crowded corridors, a strong smell of disinfectant mixed with the odor of suffering, walls in need of paint, broken plastic chairs in the waiting room. The medical team received Jasmine immediately, recognizing the urgency of the case. A young doctor with tired but attentive eyes did a quick assessment and ordered a series of tests, a CT scan to check if the fall had caused any head trauma, a chest X-ray to evaluate her respiratory situation, and blood tests to rule out other complications. Liam and Fatima stayed outside the emergency room, sitting in those uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed to make the wait even more agonizing. Fatima couldn't stop crying and blaming herself, repeating that she should have waited for the private driver, that she should never have put the girl on that bus. Liam tried to comfort her, but his own words sounded empty even to himself. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, and the reality of what he had just lost was beginning to weigh on him like a rock. It was 9:20 in the morning when the atmosphere in the corridor completely changed. A group entered through the main hospital doors with an urgency that made people automatically step aside. 3 security guards in black suits with earpieces, a stylish assistant carrying a genuine leather briefcase and a tablet, and in the center, a man of about 35, tall, with striking Middle Eastern features, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Liam earned in a full year of manual labor. If you were in Liam's place, would you have gotten off the bus to help the girl, even knowing you would miss the interview of a lifetime? Comment below and tell us what you would have done. Khalil Assad strode through that corridor as if he owned the hospital, But there was something in his face that went beyond the arrogance of money. It was pure fear, a father's desperation, the terror of someone who had power over almost everything, but couldn't control the fragility of the life of the person he loved most. He was speaking rapidly in Arabic on the phone, his loud voice echoing off the peeling walls, until he saw the doctor coming out of the emergency room. He cut the call mid-sentence and practically ran to the doctor, the words tumbling out in English thick with an accent and anxiety. "My daughter Jasmine Assad, is she okay? They told me she fell, that she was having trouble breathing. Where is she? I need to see her now." The doctor, accustomed to dealing with desperate family members, but clearly intimidated by the imposing presence of this man and his entourage, explained with professional calm that Jasmine was stable, that preliminary tests showed no serious head trauma, that the respiratory crisis had been controlled, but they wanted to keep her under observation for a few hours to ensure there were no complications. Khalil insisted on seeing his daughter immediately. The doctor led him inside, and for a few minutes the corridor was filled with a tense silence. Liam took the opportunity to go to the restroom, wash his face, and try to compose himself. When he looked in the stained mirror of the public bathroom, he saw a stranger looking back. His father's suit soaked and wrinkled, his shirt clinging to his thin frame, his eyes red with fatigue, the stubble he hadn't had time to trim that busy morning. He looked exactly like what he was, someone who had just lost the chance of a lifetime and didn't know how he would survive the consequences. When he returned to the corridor, he heard voices coming from inside the emergency room. Khalil had come out, carrying Jasmine in his arms. The girl was awake, still pale but visibly better, her arms wrapped around her father's neck as if she never wanted to let go. He whispered things to her in Arabic, kissing her forehead repeatedly, and even through the language barrier, it was possible to feel the desperate love that man had for his daughter. It was then that he saw Fatima. The expression on Khalil's face changed instantly, the tenderness replaced by a cold, controlled anger. He handed Jasmine to his assistant and walked toward the caregiver with measured, threatening steps. "How could you put my daughter at risk like this, Fatima? How dare you put her on a public bus, crowded, unsafe? I trusted you. I pay your salary so that my daughter is safe, and you nearly killed her through negligence." Fatima began to sob convulsively, trying to explain about the driver's car being at the mechanic, about the impossibility of getting a cab at that hour, about how she never meant to put the girl in danger. But Khalil wasn't interested in explanations. His voice rose with each sentence, drawing glances from other patients and hospital staff. That's when Liam, who had until then remained discreetly aside, trying not to get involved in a family conflict, saw that this was going too far. He knew that kind of anger. He had seen bosses treat workers that way before, had witnessed his own father being humiliated in public for mistakes that weren't always his fault. And something inside him, perhaps the same impulse that made him get off the bus that morning, wouldn't let him stay silent. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "You're being unfair to her." Khalil turned abruptly, as if he had completely forgotten anyone else was there. His dark eyes focused on Liam with an intensity that made the young man want to back away, but he held his ground. "And who are you to tell me what is or isn't fair with my own employee?" Khalil asked, his voice dangerously low. "I'm someone who was on the bus when your daughter got hurt, and I can tell you that Fatima did everything she could. It was an accident. Mr. Assad, she loves your daughter, anyone can see that. What happened wasn't her fault." The assistant whispered something in Khalil's ear, probably advising him not to argue with strangers in a public hospital. But he ignored her, taking a step toward Liam, sizing him up from head to toe. The soaked and wrinkled suit, the old briefcase, the worn-out shoes. "You were on the bus," Khalil repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. "And you are who, exactly?" Before Liam could answer, Fatima intervened, her voice still choked but gaining strength as she told the truth. "He's the one who saved Jasmine, Mr. Assad. When she fell and started to get sick, when the driver kicked us off the bus in the middle of an empty street, all the other passengers pretended they didn't see anything. But he got off. He dropped everything he was doing, got off the bus and stayed with us. He's the one who called the ambulance, who kept Jasmine calm, who helped me when I was panicking. He came in the ambulance all the way here, and only didn't go into the emergency room because I said I'd be okay. This man saved your daughter, sir. Khalil was silent for a long moment, processing the information. His gaze on Liam subtly changed, the anger giving way to something that seemed to be a mixture of surprise and cautious respect. "You did this?" he asked Liam directly, his voice now stripped of its earlier aggression. "You helped my daughter without knowing her, without knowing who we are." Liam simply nodded, not knowing what to say. He hadn't done it expecting recognition or gratitude. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, because he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he had turned his back on a child in danger. Khalil took his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket, a fine leather object that probably cost more than 3 months of Liam's rent. He began to pull out bills, many bills, and extended them to the young man. "How much do you want? What's the right price for thanking someone who saved my daughter?" Liam recoiled, as if the money burned, his hands raised in refusal. "I don't want any money, sir. That's not why I helped." Khalil seemed genuinely confused by that response, as if he couldn't comprehend someone doing something good without expecting financial reward. He slowly put the money away but continued to look at Liam with an expression that mixed curiosity and something harder to define. "Then at least tell me your name. I have to know the name of the man who saved my daughter." Liam Henry Smith." At that moment, the synthetic leather briefcase Liam had propped against the chair beside him slipped and fell to the floor, scattering some documents. Khalil's assistant, trained to be efficient, immediately bent down to help gather the papers. When she picked up the resume, now stained by the rain but still legible, her eyes widened. She read the header aloud, almost in disbelief. "Tech Solutions, invitation for a job interview. Liam Henry Smith, junior analyst position. Today's date, 8 a.m. The silence that followed was absolute. Khalil took the document from his assistant's hands and read every line carefully, as understanding spread across his face. He looked at his expensive wristwatch, saw it was almost 10 o'clock, and then looked back at Liam with a completely transformed expression. "You had an interview at my company this morning," he said, and it wasn't a question, but a statement heavy with meaning. "You missed your interview because you were here helping my daughter." Liam couldn't answer. He simply nodded, feeling the lump in his throat tighten so much that he was afraid he would break down right there if he tried to speak. Khalil stared at this young man in a soaked suit, at this stained resume that told the story of someone who had fought against all odds to get there, and something in his face changed. The hardness of the successful businessman gave way to something more human, more vulnerable. "Come with me," he said finally. "We're going to reschedule your interview, and I will be there personally." Liam didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The turn of events was so surreal it felt like something from a bad movie. But Khalil Assad was already giving orders to his assistant, telling her to contact the Human Resources Department, explain the situation, and schedule a new date urgently. Then he turned to Fatima, who was still trembling with fear and relief. "You're not fired, Fatima. I was wrong to yell at you, but please never put my daughter in a risky situation again. If you have a problem with the driver, call me, call another car, do whatever it takes. Jasmine is all I have in this world." The caregiver nodded vigorously, her tears now of gratitude and relief. Khalil went back to get Jasmine, who had been quietly observing everything from the assistant's arms with those big, curious eyes. As he passed Liam, the little girl reached out her small hand and touched his face gently, a simple gesture so full of innocence that it made his eyes burn with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered in a still, weak voice. You're a good man." Liam just smiled, the broken smile of someone who had been through too many emotions in a few hours and no longer had the strength to process it all. Khalil watched the interaction, and something in his chest tightened. This young man wasn't just someone who had helped his daughter. He was someone special, the kind of person the world tries to crush, but who refuses to lose their humanity. 3 days later, Liam received an email from Tech Solutions. It wasn't the cold, automated response he expected. It was a personal message signed by the Director of Human Resources. explaining that the company recognized the emergency he had faced and would like to reschedule the interview for the following Monday at 10 in the morning. At the end of the email, there was a note. CEO Khalil Assad would make a point of participating personally in the selection process. When Liam showed the email to Isabella that night, during their simple dinner of instant noodles that was all they could afford that week, the girl jumped from her chair and hugged him so tightly she almost knocked them both to the floor. "I knew it, Liam, I knew. You did the right thing. Dad would be proud of you. You helped that little girl and now you're getting a new chance. Good things happen to people who do the right thing, even when it's hard." Liam hugged his sister back, feeling the tears finally fall freely. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as it had always seemed, that sometimes, very rarely, the right choices really did lead to better places, that the sacrifice of that rainy morning had not been in vain. That night before going to sleep, Liam hung his father's suit on the clothesline in the utility area to dry completely. He looked at that piece of clothing that had been through so much with him, that had gotten soaked in the rain while he saved a life, and felt a deep connection to William's memory. His father had spent his life trying to do the right thing, working to exhaustion to give his family the best. He had never received recognition for it, never had his second chance. But maybe in some mysterious way William had been there that morning, guiding his son's hands, whispering in his ear to get off that bus, to choose compassion over convenience. And now, with the rescheduled interview and the promise of a new opportunity, Liam felt he was finally honoring his father's memory. Not just by wearing his suit, but by living according to the values William had tried to teach. That being good doesn't always bring immediate rewards, but it's the only path to living at peace with yourself. That doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, is what defines a person's character. And that, in the end, the grand finale that no one knows when will come. What matters isn't how much money you made or what position you held, but how many lives you touched, how many people you helped, how many times you chose love over fear. That night, for the first time in years, Liam slept without the crushing weight of despair on his chest. He slept with hope, true hope, that the future he had worked so hard to build was finally within reach of his calloused hands, and that this time, nothing would stop him from seizing that chance with all the strength he had inside him. Monday dawned with a clear blue sky over New York, so different from that rainy Thursday that had changed everything. Liam woke up early again, but this time with a completely different feeling in his chest. It wasn't just nervousness or fragile hope. It was something more solid, more concrete, as if the universe had finally decided he deserved a real chance. His father's suit was clean and dry, carefully ironed by Isabella the night before, with the old iron that got too hot on one side and not enough on the other. The girl had insisted on helping, saying she wanted her brother to go to the interview with all the luck possible. Liam put on the suit with the same respect as always, but now it carried an additional memory. That fabric had protected a frightened child, had been soaked in the rain while he made the hardest choice of his life. The suit was not just his father's inheritance, it was a testament to his own courage. This time he left home with plenty of time to spare. He took the subway instead of the bus, spending a little more but ensuring absolute punctuality. When he emerged from Grand Central Station and walked down Park Avenue, he felt small before those gigantic glass and steel buildings, each representing fortunes he could barely imagine. The Tech Solutions headquarters was in one of the most modern buildings, all mirrored, reflecting the blue sky in a way that made the building seem made of light. The reception was a large, minimalist space, with bold designer furniture and an entire wall covered by a digital art installation that changed color as people moved. Liam felt completely out of place there, but he took a deep breath and introduced himself to the receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile who checked his name on the list and directed him to the 12th floor. The elevator was silent and fast, ascending with a smoothness that contrasted sharply with the creaking stairs of his building. When the doors opened, Liam was greeted by an assistant who led him through naturally lit corridors, with glass walls that revealed offices filled with state-of-the-art computers, young professionals focused on their screens, and meeting rooms with technology he had only seen in videos online. He was taken to a smaller yet still impressive meeting room with a light wood oval table and ergonomic chairs that looked like they cost more than everything he owned. 3 people were already seated there, waiting. The first was a woman of about 40, her hair in a flawless bun, her clothes sober but clearly expensive, her expression cordial but professional. She introduced herself as Marianne Campbell, Director of Human Resources. The second was an older man, perhaps 50, thin, with gold-rimmed glasses and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture that of someone accustomed to authority, and there was something in his gaze as he assessed Liam that made the young man feel an immediate discomfort. He introduced himself as Robert Fields, Senior Technology Manager, and at the head of the table, reclining in a leather chair, was Khalil Assad. He wore a dress shirt without a tie, the sleeves slightly rolled up, and his dark eyes watched Liam with an intensity that was both intimidating and encouraging. When their eyes met, Khalil nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between them. "Please have a seat, Mr. Smith," Marianne said, indicating the empty chair across the table. "We'll start with some questions about your education and professional experience." What followed were 40 minutes of technical questions, knowledge assessment, and discussion about projects Liam had developed during his technical course and in the side jobs he did in his spare time. He answered everything with growing confidence, realizing that he really knew what he was talking about, that all those years of studying at night had not been in vain. Marianne seemed impressed, constantly taking notes and asking follow-up questions that showed genuine interest. But Robert Fields had a completely different demeanor. Every answer from Liam was met with poorly, disguised skepticism. He questioned not only Liam's technical knowledge, but his entire professional trajectory. "I see here that you've had several temporary jobs, never staying more than a year in one place. Doesn't that show a lack of commitment, of stability? How can we trust that you won't just leave the company when a better offer comes along?" Liam sensed the trap in the question, but answered honestly. "Mr. Fields, I worked temporary jobs because they were the only opportunities I could get while studying at night and taking care of my younger sister. I needed flexible hours, and the permanent jobs available for someone in my situation required availability I didn't have. It wasn't a lack of commitment, it was survival. Now that I've finished my training and my sister is older, I'm able to dedicate myself fully to a permanent position. And I can assure you that when I make a commitment, I see it through to the end." The answer was good, but Robert didn't seem satisfied. He continued with increasingly aggressive questions, questioning whether Liam really had the right profile to integrate into the company culture, whether he wouldn't have difficulty working with such a qualified team, whether he was prepared for the demands of a high-level corporate environment. Khalil watched everything in silence, his eyes moving from Liam to Robert and back, as if he were evaluating not just the answers, but the power dynamics unfolding in that room. Marianne tried to balance things, asking more neutral questions, but it was obvious that Robert had some kind of visceral resistance to Liam's presence there. At the end of the interview, when Liam was dismissed to wait for the decision outside, Marianne, Robert and Khalil were left alone in the room. What happened in there, Liam? Only found out later, months later, when Marianne told him in a moment of confidence. Robert had been direct in his opposition. "Khalil, with all due respect, this young man doesn't have the profile we need. He's smart, I don't deny it, but he comes from a completely different background. He'll have trouble adapting, understanding the subtleties of the corporate environment, and frankly, I think we're being influenced by emotional issues here. The fact that he helped your daughter shouldn't make us lower our hiring standards." Khalil had listened without interrupting, but when Robert finished, his response was firm. "Robert, this young man has more character in his little finger than many people in this company have in their entire bodies. He missed a job interview, the chance of a lifetime, to help a stranger's child. How many of our employees, with all their MBAs and leadership training, would have done the same? He's hired, and it's not negotiable." The decision was communicated to Liam that same day. He would start as a junior analyst the following Monday, with a salary that, although modest by tech solution standards, was 4 times what he earned loading boxes. When he received the news, Liam had to sit down, his legs shaking so much they couldn't support him. He had done it. Against all odds, all obstacles, the entire structure that seemed designed to keep him where he was, he had done it. The first few weeks at Tech Solutions were an emotional roller coaster. Liam arrived early every day, always the first on his team, and left late, the last to turn off his computer. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, asked intelligent questions, and offered creative solutions to problems others didn't even realize existed. His dedication was noticed by everyone, especially Marianne, who saw in him the potential she had championed since the interview. But Robert Fields did not give up his resistance. He found subtle ways to sabotage Liam, delegating impossible tasks with unrealistic deadlines, excluding him from important meetings, and giving others credit for solutions Liam had developed. It was a silent war, fought in corporate hallways with fake smiles and daggers hidden in poisoned compliments. 3 months after he was hired, Liam was working on a critical project, developing a data analysis system for an important client in the financial sector. The project was under pressure, with tight deadlines and sky-high expectations. Robert led the team but delegated most of the technical work to Liam and other junior analysts. It was a Friday night, and Liam was reviewing the code for the 3rd time, checking every line, every function, every algorithm. Something was bothering him, a feeling that something wasn't right. The numbers the system generated seemed consistent at first glance, but when he started testing extreme scenarios, non-standard situations, he noticed a crucial error. The model was using an outdated formula to calculate risk rates, a flaw that could result in completely wrong analyses and million-dollar losses for the client. Liam's stomach turned. The project was due to be presented on Monday. If that error went unnoticed and the system was implemented, the consequences would be disastrous not only for the client, but for the entire reputation of Tech Solutions. He picked up the phone and called Robert, explaining the situation urgently. The manager's response was cold and irritated. "Liam, you're exaggerating. That model was reviewed by our senior data scientist. If there was an error, she would have noticed. I think you're just nervous and seeing problems where there are none. Go home, get some rest, and we'll talk calmly. On Monday." But Liam couldn't just leave. He spent the entire weekend redoing the calculations, documenting the error, and creating a detailed presentation showing exactly where the problem was and how to fix it. On Monday morning, he requested an urgent meeting with the entire team, including the data scientist who had approved the original model. The meeting was tense. Robert tried to downplay the situation, suggesting Liam was causing unnecessary alarm. But when the data scientist, a brilliant woman named Francesca, analyzed the data Liam had prepared, her face went pale. She publicly admitted that she had made a mistake, that she was overwhelmed with multiple projects and had approved the model without the necessary deep review. If the system had been implemented with that flaw, the damage would have been irreparable. The project was postponed, the error corrected, and the client was informed of the problem and impressed with the company's diligence in ensuring quality above all else. Khalil, when he heard the story, sent a thank you email to the entire team, publicly acknowledging the importance of Liam's careful review. But in the email, the name of the person who discovered the problem did not appear. Robert had made sure the credit went to the team as a whole, never specifically mentioning the junior analyst who had saved the project. And in the hallways, Liam began to feel the looks change. Robert no longer saw him as a minor annoyance, but as a real threat. Then came the dirtiest blow. 2 weeks after the project incident, Liam was called to the company's internal security department. 2 serious men with investigator badges informed him that there was evidence that someone had used his access credentials to illegally copy gigabytes of confidential data from one of the company's most important clients. The logs were clear: his username, his password, his access profile. Liam was in shock. He tried to explain that he hadn't done it, that he would never violate the company's trust in that way, but the investigators were adamant. He was preventively suspended while the investigation continued. His corporate computer and phone were confiscated. Overnight, he went from a promising employee to a suspect in a corporate crime. He went home completely destroyed. Isabella immediately noticed something was wrong, but he tried to hide it, making an excuse about being tired. But she knew her brother too. Well, knew when he was carrying a weight he couldn't share. That night, as she prepared the simple dinner that was all they could afford, she held his hand and said with all the seriousness an 8-year-old can muster, "Liam, whatever is happening, it's going to be okay. You're a good person, and good people always find a way to make the right things win." He hugged his sister and let the tears fall for the first time since he had been accused. How could he have been so naive as to think he had a real chance? How he not realize that people like him were not welcome in those spaces, no matter how much talent he had, how hard he worked? The system was programmed to expel him, and Robert had found the perfect way to make it look legitimate. But Liam had something Robert didn't expect. He was good at what he did, very good, and he had one clue that could save him. On the day the data leak supposedly happened, he was in a mandatory training session on corporate ethics in a room full of people, including 2 company directors. There was an attendance, record photos, even an online test he had taken using the training room computer. It was impossible for him to have been accessing confidential data at the same time. He documented all of this and sent a detailed email to Marianne, the HR director who had believed in him from the beginning. He explained the situation, attached the evidence of his alibi, and made a request that someone investigate more deeply, that they not accept the most obvious explanation without question. Marianne took the case directly to Khalil, and the entrepreneur, remembering the young man who had gotten off a bus to help a stranger's child, decided to do something that rarely happened in companies of that size. He trusted him. He called an extraordinary meeting with the security team, with Robert, with the investigators, and requested full access to the network logs. He authorized Liam, even while suspended, to have temporary monitored access to the system logs so he could help with the investigation. It was a risky decision that went against all protocols, but Khalil had learned an important lesson that rainy morning. Sometimes you have to trust people even when the evidence seems damning. Liam worked for 72 hours almost non-stop, reviewing thousands of lines of logs, tracking patterns, looking for anomalies. And finally, in the early hours of Thursday morning, he found what he was looking for. A small error in the digital masking of the real intruder. Whoever had used Liam's credentials had made a tiny, almost imperceptible technical slip-up, but one that exposed the real origin of the connection. The IP address didn't come from Liam's computer. It came from Robert Fields's home. The revelation was like a bombshell. In the hastily convened meeting the next morning, with irrefutable technical proof, cross-referenced times, and undeniable records, Robert desperately tried to defend himself. He claimed his computer had been hacked, that someone was trying to frame him, that it was all a misunderstanding. But when Khalil asked directly why anyone would want to frame him, why anyone would have an interest in destroying his reputation, Robert made a fatal mistake. His mask of a controlled professional fell. The anger, the prejudice, all the venom he had stored up for months came out in an explosion of brutal honesty. Because it's not possible that a kid from the ghetto who barely has a decent education is better at what I do than me. I've worked for years at this company, I have an MBA, international experience, and this kid shows up out of nowhere and starts to stand out? He doesn't belong in this environment. People like him should stay where they came from, not try to occupy spaces that weren't made for them. The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. Marianne had tears of anger in her eyes. The investigators seemed shocked by the raw admission of prejudice. And Khalil, who had built an empire after arriving in the country as a refugee, who knew intimately the weight of racism and xenophobia, stood up slowly. His voice low but filled with an authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Robert Fields, you are fired for cause, not just for sabotage and attempting to frame an innocent colleague, but for embodying exactly the kind of mentality this company does not tolerate. Here, we value talent, character, and dedication, not where people come from. Liam Smith has shown more professionalism and integrity in 3 months than you have in all your years here." Robert left the room escorted by security, his small kingdom of power crumbling in minutes. Liam, who had watched everything in silence, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened, was called by Khalil for a private conversation in his office. What happened there changed everything. Khalil not only reinstated Liam with a formal apology from the company, but offered him the leadership position that had become vacant with Robert's dismissal. Not as an analyst, but as a team leader, with a substantial salary increase and more responsibilities. More than that, he asked Liam to help him create an opportunity program within the company, aimed at talented young people from low-income backgrounds, students who had potential but lacked open doors. Liam accepted, not just for the salary that would completely change his and Isabella's life, but for the symbolic weight of it. He was occupying a place he had always been told, directly or indirectly, was not for people like him. And now he would have the power to open those same doors for others who came from where he came from, who carried the same dreams and the same determination against all odds. When he returned home that night, with the signed contract in his briefcase and his heart lighter than it had been in months, he found Isabella waiting up for him. She ran to hug him before he could even take off his coat, and without him saying a word, she whispered in his ear, "You did it, didn't you? You won." And Liam, holding his sister in his arms, looking around the small apartment they could soon leave behind, felt that yes, he had won. Not just a job or an enemy. He had proven to himself, to the world, and most importantly, to all those who would come after him, that it was possible. That talent and character mattered more than birthright. That doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, eventually led to places worth every sacrifice. That the rain-soaked suit, the sleepless nights, the impossible choices, it all had meaning. And that now, finally, he could breathe. 6 months after taking the leadership position at Tech Solutions, Liam barely recognized his own life. He and Isabella had moved to a larger, safer apartment in a better neighborhood, where the walls had no damp patches and the window didn't let in the icy pre-dawn chill. The girl was enrolled in a decent private school, had her own new books, clothes that didn't come from donations, and her smile, always present but once burdened with a premature maturity, now had the lightness that every 9-year-old deserved. But Liam did not allow himself to forget where he came from. Every morning, as he put on the new suit he had bought with his first paycheck, he would look at his father's suit hanging in the wardrobe, that piece of clothing that had been through so much with him, and renew his commitment to honor that memory. William had never received recognition for what he did, never saw the fruits of so much sacrifice. Liam carried the responsibility to live not only for himself and Isabella, but for all those who had fought and failed to get there. The team he led at Tech Solutions was diverse and talented, composed not only of people with traditional educations, but of young people he himself had helped recruit through the new opportunity program he had developed with Khalil. They were students from public universities, people who worked during the day and studied at night, people with stories similar to his own, and they all brought new perspectives, creative solutions that enriched the work in a way that traditional hiring processes never would have found. Khalil had become more than a boss. He was a mentor, someone who deeply understood what Liam had been through because he himself had experienced his own version of those struggles. They had lunch together at least once a week, talking not just about business but about life, about how to use success to create real impact, about the responsibility of those who managed to climb up to send the elevator back down for those still at the bottom. It was during one of these lunches that Khalil brought up an idea that would change everything again. "Liam, I've been thinking a lot about that day on the bus, about how you made a decision that cost you so much but saved my daughter. And I think about how many Jasmines there are out there, how many people need help at crucial moments, and how our society is programmed for everyone to look away and pretend they see nothing. I want to do something about it. I want to create something that's bigger than both of us." Liam listened intently as Khalil developed the idea. To create a foundation focused on transforming spaces of urban neglect into points of care. They would start with bus stops, those forgotten places where workers spent hours every day waiting for transport, exposed to the sun, the rain, the danger. They would renovate these stops, install decent lighting, proper shelter, and safe benches. More than that, Each stop would have a plaque with real stories of people who had chosen not to turn away, who had helped strangers, who had made a difference. "And the first one," Khalil said, emotion evident in his voice, "will be in honor of your father, William. It will bear his name. It will tell the story of a man who worked to exhaustion to give his family a better life, a man who never received the recognition he deserved. We'll do it for him, and for all the Williams in this country." Liam couldn't speak for a long moment. Tears burned in his eyes, emotion tightening his throat. The idea that his father's name, who had died without anyone but his own family caring, would be in a public space, remembered and honored, was something he had never dared to imagine. The project started small, but grew quickly. Partner companies joined the initiative, each contributing expertise and resources. The first renovated bus stop was inaugurated 6 months later, on the very street where Liam and Isabella lived when it all began. The transformation was impressive. What was once a precarious, poorly lit, unsafe structure was now a clean, well-maintained space, with a roof that protected from the rain, comfortable benches and LED lighting that worked all night. And on the main wall, a bronze plaque with the name William Smith and a short but powerful text about his legacy. The inauguration was an emotional event. Not only executives from tech solutions and project partners attended, but also neighborhood residents, people who had known William, workers who used that stop every day. Isabella was there, wearing a new dress, but holding her old teddy bear, a connection to who she was before everything changed. When Liam went up to give the inauguration speech, she was in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Liam looked at the small crowd, at the faces of ordinary people who represented exactly who this project was intended to serve, and began to speak, his voice trembling with emotion but steadying with each word. "My father, William Smith, worked for 30 years as a maintenance assistant. He woke up before sunrise, took crowded buses just like the one that passes here, and worked long hours for a salary that barely supported his family. He never complained. He never said life had been unfair to him. He just worked day after day, believing he was building something better for me and my sister." Liam paused, looking at Isabella, who was crying silently as she clutched the teddy bear to her chest. He didn't live to see this day. He didn't live to see his son working at a tech company, leading a team, helping to create opportunities for other young people. He didn't live to see his daughter in a decent school, having the opportunities he always dreamed she would have. "But everything I am today, everything I've managed to build, was possible because of what he taught me, not with pretty words or formal lessons, but with the silent example of someone who always tried to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when no one was watching, even when there was no reward beyond his own clear conscience." The crowd listened in respectful silence, many with tears in their eyes, recognizing their own stories in his words. "A year and a half ago," Liam continued, "I got on a bus very much like the ones that pass here. I had a perfect plan in my head, to arrive on time for a job interview that could change my life. But then a child fell, got hurt, and the driver decided it wasn't his problem. He kicked the girl and her caregiver out onto an empty street, and the bus moved on. All the other passengers pretended they saw nothing, and I had to choose, stick to my plan or get off to help." He looked directly at Khalil, who was standing beside Jasmine. The girl, now 5.5, held her father's hand and looked at Liam with those big eyes that seemed to understand more than they should at her age. "I got off that bus. I missed the interview. I thought I had thrown away my only chance to change my life. But what I didn't know was that that choice, that moment of deciding that a life mattered more than my plans, would open doors I never imagined existed. The girl I helped was the daughter of the entrepreneur who was supposed to interview me, and more importantly, that moment taught me something fundamental, that the kind of person we are is revealed in the interruptions, in the unplanned moments, when no one is watching and no one is going to give us a medal for doing the right thing." Liam pointed to the plaque with his father's name. "My father never had this public recognition. He never had his name on a plaque, never received awards or applause, but he saved lives, in his own way, by supporting a family, caring for his children, being a silent example of dignity and hard work. This bus stop bears his name, but it is dedicated to all the Williams in this country. People who wake up early, take crowded public transport, work jobs that don't value their talent, and yet they keep trying, keep believing that it's worth being decent in a world that often doesn't reward decency. His voice grew in intensity, filled with passion and conviction. This is not just a renovated bus stop, it's a symbol. It's a statement that people matter, that workers who spend hours waiting for transport deserve basic dignity, protection from the rain, benches to sit on, light to feel safe. That each of us has a responsibility to make our city a better place, not through grand gestures, but through attention to the everyday, the ordinary, the things that affect real people every day. Liam stepped down from the small, improvised stage and walked to the plaque, running his fingers over the name engraved in bronze. William Smith, his father, his hero. The man who had died without recognition, but whose legacy was now immortalized. There for all to see and remember that ordinary lives carry extraordinary stories. In parallel with the bus stop project, the scholarship program Liam had helped develop was beginning to show impressive results. Dozens of low-income youth had benefited, able to study without having to choose between paying rent or buying books, between working 2 shifts or attending classes. Some had already been hired by tech solutions or partner companies. Others were finishing their degrees with excellent grades, ready to bring knowledge and opportunity back to their communities. Liam made a point of personally meeting each scholarship recipient. He had lunch with them, listened to their stories, offered not just professional but personal mentorship. He knew exactly what it was like to be in that position, carrying the weight of an entire family's expectations, feeling imposter syndrome try to convince him he didn't deserve to be there. And he always repeated the same message: you deserve to be here, not in spite of where you came from, but because of who you are. Your talent is real, your dedication is valuable, and your perspective is exactly what this country needs. The most important ceremony came a year after the inauguration of the first bus stop. Tech Solutions organized a general meeting with all employees, an event that happened only once a year, where results were presented and achievements celebrated. But that year, Khalil had prepared something special. In the middle of the presentation, he paused, and silence fell over the auditorium where 200 people were gathered. He asked Liam to come up on stage, which made the young leader frown in confusion, not understanding what was happening. When he stood next to Khalil, he saw that Jasmine was there too, accompanied by Fatima. Khalil turned to the audience and began to tell the story from the beginning. He spoke of that rainy Thursday morning, of the crowded bus, of his daughter's fall and the indifference of the passengers. He spoke of the unknown young man who got off to help, who missed the most important interview of his life, who carried a frightened child and called for help while the rain soaked the only suit he owned. The audience listened, fascinated, many unaware of the story, others having heard only fragmented versions. Khalil talked about how he discovered that the stranger was the candidate who hadn't shown up for the interview, about how he decided to trust him and give him a second chance. He spoke of Liam's exceptional talent, how he had saved important projects, how he had been sabotaged by prejudice, and yet had proven his innocence and his worth. "This man beside me," Khalil said, his voice thick with emotion, "is not just an exceptional employee. He is a living example of the kind of character we want to cultivate in this company. He saved my daughter without expecting anything in return, and since then he has been saving this company with his intelligence, his dedication, and his refusal to become cynical in a world that so often rewards cynicism." Khalil turned to Liam, his eyes shining with restrained tears. "Therefore, on behalf of Tech Solutions and my family, I want to announce that you are being promoted to Director of Technology and Social Innovation, not only recognizing your technical contributions, but celebrating who you are as a human being. And furthermore, we are creating a permanent fund in your father's name, the William Smith Fund, which will finance scholarships forever, ensuring that young people like you will never again have to choose between surviving and studying." The audience erupted in applause. People stood up, the sound echoing through the auditorium, and Liam stood there completely overwhelmed by emotion, unable to process it all. Jasmine ran to him and hugged his legs, a simple gesture from a child who still remembered, however vaguely, the man who had helped her when she was scared. When the applause finally died down and Liam found his voice, he spoke directly from the heart. "I don't know what to say. I don't feel like a hero or an example. I feel like someone who just tried to do what was right. What my father taught me to do. But I accept this honor not for myself, but to represent all those who never receive recognition. The invisible workers who keep this city running. The mothers who work 3 jobs to educate their children. The young people who study at night after exhausting days of manual labor. They all deserve to be seen, valued, and recognized." He looked directly at the scholarship recipients in the audience, some with tears streaming openly down their faces. "To every one of you who came from where I came from, who knows the bitter taste of exclusion, who has been judged by the color of your skin, your last name, the zip code where you live, the accent you carry, the fact that your parents don't have a university degree, I say this: you belong here. Your talent is real. Your worth is not determined by where you were born, but by who you choose to be. And when you get where you want to go, remember to send the elevator back down for those still at the bottom, because no one gets anywhere alone. I didn't." In the following months, Liam's story went viral on social media, appeared in newspapers, and became an example in talks on leadership and social responsibility. But he kept his feet on the ground, refusing long interviews, avoiding the spotlight that could turn him into a celebrity. His mission was not to be famous, but to use whatever platform he had to amplify voices that were not normally heard. The bus stop renovation program expanded to other cities. Each inaugurated stop bore the name of an ordinary worker who had made a difference in their community. A cleaning lady who had raised 5 children alone, all of whom graduated from university. A bus driver who saved lives during an accident. A street vendor who fed homeless children for years without asking for recognition. Stories that once died in anonymity were now preserved, celebrated, and transformed into inspiration. Isabella, now 10, began to accompany her brother to some of the inaugurations. She spoke with a surprising fluency for her age about what it was like to grow up without privilege but with dignity, about how her brother's example had shown that kindness was not weakness, that compassion was not naivety, that doing the right thing had value even when it was costly. Her presence added an extra layer of emotion to the events, reminding everyone that every child they helped could become the next Liam, the next Isabella, the next person to transform the world around them. On one particularly significant afternoon, almost 2 years after that crowded bus had changed everything, Liam stood at the bus stop bearing his father's name, watching the street traffic. It was late afternoon, rush hour, and workers heading home stopped there, rested on the benches, and sheltered from the light drizzle under the new roof. Some read the plaque about William, others simply appreciated having a decent place to wait. Khalil appeared by surprise, accompanied by Jasmine, who at 6 was now smarter and more articulate. The girl ran to Liam and gave him a drawing she had made, a scene of a bus with a man helping a child. In the corner, written in a shaky but careful hand, was a message: "Thank you for saving me and for making the world better." Liam knelt to be at the girl's level and hugged her tenderly. "No, Jasmine, you saved me. Without that day, without you, I would still be loading boxes and dreaming of a better life without knowing how to achieve it. You gave me a chance to show who I was, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor that chance." Khalil placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, a simple but meaningful gesture. There stood 2 men from completely different backgrounds, united by a series of improbable coincidences that had transformed into a shared purpose. A Middle Eastern entrepreneur who had fled war and built an empire through talent and hard work. A young black man from the outer boroughs who had chosen compassion over convenience and found his way to leadership. And between them, a child who had been the unwitting catalyst for a transformation that went far beyond their 3 lives. As they watched a bus pull up to that newly renovated stop, they saw a scene that made them all smile. An elderly woman was having trouble getting on with her heavy bags, and a young student immediately got off to help her, holding her groceries while she settled into a seat. A small, common gesture, but one that carried the exact message their entire journey had tried to spread: that kindness matters, that people matter, that small acts of kindness create ripples that transform the world. Liam looked at his father's name engraved in bronze, thought about how William would have felt seeing all of this, and whispered a promise he knew his father, wherever he was, could hear. "I carried on your legacy, Dad. Not in the way you imagined, but in the way you taught me. By doing the right thing, caring for those in need, never losing my humanity even when the world tries to rip it away from you. And I'll make sure Isabella grows up with these same values so she can pass them on when it's her turn. Your name will never be forgotten, and your life, even without public recognition, planted seeds that are now blooming in gardens you never imagined existed." That afternoon, as the sun set over New York, painting the sky in orange and purple, 3 generations of stories intertwined at that renovated bus stop. William's, who worked to his limit and never saw reward; Liam's, who transformed sacrifice into purpose; and Isabella's and Jasmine's children, who would grow up in a slightly better world because someone on a rainy Thursday morning decided that a stranger's life mattered more than his own plans. And that, in the end, was the true meaning of it all: that social transformation doesn't happen through grand revolutions or impossible heroes, but through the daily choice, repeated countless times by ordinary people, not to turn away when someone needs help, not to accept injustice just because it has always been that way, to use whatever power one has, however small, to make the world a little less cruel for those who come after. The story of Liam and William, of the bus and the interview, of the saved child and the open doors, was not a fairy tale where everything magically resolves itself. It was a real story, full of the complications and injustices that mark the lives of those not born with privilege. But it was also living proof that kindness has power, that character eventually wins, that unjust systems can be challenged by people who refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable. And as that bus continued on its route, carrying tired workers to their modest homes, passing bus stops that now bore the names of common people and stories of everyday courage, the city continued its frenetic pace, but carrying within it small seeds of transformation planted by someone who decided it was worth trying to do things differently. Because in the end, the question was never whether one person could change the whole world. The question was always whether one person could change someone's world. And Liam had learned on that rainy morning, that seemed to have happened in another lifetime, that the answer was yes. It had always been yes. And it always would be yes, as long as there were people willing to get off the bus when everyone else remained seated, pretending they saw nothing. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Liam, William, and Jasmine has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of courage, sacrifice, and transformation, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this narrative. Was it Liam's decision on the bus? Was it his persistence in the face of injustice? Was it the memory of William being honored? We want to know what resonated with you. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which remind us of the power of kindness and the importance of never giving up on doing the right thing. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where another emotional story will touch your soul.